Alright, so we just finished up the characteristics of life. So we're going to kind of dive into each little piece as we go. So the first thing we need to talk about is cells. Remember, if it's not made up of cells, it doesn't check off that little check mark on our characteristics of life checklist, so it's not living. Even if it has all the other stuff, it still has to be made of cells. So let's look at an animal cell. First thing, inside the cell, you have these little pieces. If you want to think of it as a person, then the things inside the cell, if you think of the person as the cell, the things inside the cell are called organelles. That would be similar to a person's organs. They are little factories kind of inside the cell, and they each have a specific job. You don't want the liver to have to pump blood and filter and breathe in and bring in oxygen and excrete urine. You don't want it to have to do all those things. So each organ in a person has a specific job. It's basically part of this body system. It's breathe, pump blood, urine, digestion. So the cell is going to operate the same way, where each organelle is going to have a very, very important function. Here's the basics for human cell and plant cell. Again, there's some more, but this is really all I care about you knowing at this point. Human cell. These stuff right here in black. This line right here. This is the outside. This is the cell membrane. So the cell membrane is going to function. It's still kind of an organelle. It's a part. It's like talking about your skin if you're a human. So the cell membrane is going to do what the skin would do. It's going to let certain stuff in. It's going to let certain things out. It's going to control. Remember we mentioned homeostasis in characteristics of life? It's going to maintain the balance. If you don't have some kind of gatekeeper, stuff is just going to kind of go in and out. It's the lid of the cell, if you want to think of it in very, very basic terms. So, cell membrane is here. You also have it on the plant. Plant has one too. So this right here, this extra line right here on this plant, this is how you can tell a plant cell apart from an animal cell. It's going to have a cell wall. Okay, the cell wall is specific to plants and some other creatures, but basically humans and like mammals and animals, they don't have it. The cell wall is just an extra layer. So that's the pink layer. That's why the human cell doesn't have it. Again, same thing. It's only letting certain things out. It provides structure. It can actually kind of make the plant more rigid, which is a little bit better for a plant that doesn't want to get blown over or knocked over. So it's going to basically maintain that cell shape as long as possible. This blue blob right here is a vacuole. So a vacuole is going to function as kind of a water fluid compartment. This is going to be able to take stuff in, it's be able to move stuff around. It's kind of a little mini tank within the cell. Little light blue thing right here, the Golgi apparatus. Alright, so the Golgi apparatus, we don't talk about this a whole lot in freshman biology, but you do need to know the basics. So what it's going to do, it's going to modify proteins. We will get into how protein's actually created, so don't worry about that. Just know that the Golgi apparatus is going to deal with protein formation. That's all you need to know for now. Purple thing up on the top. A lot of y'all will already know what this is. This is the nucleus. Alright, so the nucleus is going to house the genetic material. So you got it over here also. That is where you're actually going to contain the DNA. So right here, this black squiggly stuff, that'd be our DNA. It's housed inside the nucleus largely because if your DNA is your code, your DNA is, remember, all the instructions on how to build you. If something messes up and the code gets damaged, the cell may not realize it until it's already followed the directions. Does that make sense? You are actually going to create something wrong if the DNA is damaged. Red squigglies, this is called the endoplasmic reticulum. So again, just like the Golgi apparatus, the endoplasmic reticulum is dealing with proteins and ribosomes and makes proteins and puts membranes around proteins. Don't worry about it. Just know it deals with proteins for now. So we know it's the little squiggly lines around our nucleus, and it deals with proteins. So the last two are the most important. Every single year, people know what this is, and I'm like, what is this thing? And I say, we figure out it's mitochondria, and everybody goes, oh my gosh, powerhouse of the cell. And then I say, oh cool, what does that mean? And it's crickets. So The mitochondria. Powerhouse of the cell basically means this is important for making cell energy. What it actually does is it takes energy from the surroundings or from the environment or wherever it got it, and it makes it usable by that cell. An easy example is grass, okay? Humans can't digest really grass. Like, we don't graze on grass like a cow would. We don't have the ability to break it down. We have to find, even though there's technically carbs in grass, there's technically energy in there, our body just simply can't use it. So if it's not a usable form of energy, it really doesn't matter how much energy it has. We can't get to it. We can't process it. So the mitochondria, its job is to process energy and make it usable by the cell. The cell only can use a very, very specific type of energy, okay? It can't use a Cheeto in its raw form. It can't just use a random Cheeto. Plant cells have it also. There's our mitochondria. So here's the last one. That is it for human cells. Draw an ugly line. Oh gosh. Okay, close enough. The last one is not in the human cell. You'll notice this little green circle over here. It's not in the human cell. Again, this is one you may know simply from like middle school biology or just kind of like general knowledge. This is the chloroplast. The chloroplast's job in a plant. It's green, so you can probably already figure out it's a plant thing. Its job is to take energy from the sun, which we receive energy from the sun as photons. It's taking the energy from the sun and it's going to make it into food for the plant. Food for the plant is a type of sugar called glucose. We eat glucose all the time. We break down fruits and candy and bread and pasta, and we break all this down into glucose eventually. Remember we were talking about monosaccharides, polysaccharides? Glucose is a monomer. It's one little unit of sugar. We process all this to get one unit of sugar. So the plant absorbs photons from the sun and solar energy and makes its own little pile of glucose. That is what it's going to have to process. So it still can't use glucose. It's still like smearing a big handful of sugar on your chest before you do bench press. Your body's not going to do anything with that. By smearing sugar on you, you're not absorbing it. You're not going to like get more energy for your exercise. Your body has to process that sugar into something that the chest muscle cells can use. Remember, mitochondria does that. So we ingest the sugar, it gets processed, mitochondria makes it usable for the cells, then the chest muscles will be able to use it. The plant doesn't have to eat stuff to get to that initial glucose. It gets it from the sun. Either way, you're still going to have to process it with the mitochondria to make it usable. That's why mitochondria is in both. Plants, they can get it from the sun. Remember, they receive it as photons that are exiting the sun and hitting us. We get those photons, we use it for energy. They are going to make glucose, that monomer. An animal can eat food. It's going to then break down that food, which is a bunch of polymers. Remember, it's breaking down a cheeseburger, a string of Mardi Gras beads, to get glucose, which is the single bead. It can get a lot of beads from a string. So you're going to get lots of glucose from these bigger and bigger strings. Respiration means to breathe, right? Respiration is just breathing like you're thinking lungs, but cells actually have to go through respiration. I need to breathe in oxygen. So here's our food over here. Here's our oxygen. Both of those go into the mitochondria. The mitochondria then process it. It has a bunch of complicated process. You don't have to really know them too much. Basically, all you have to know is that at the end of this process, you start out with oxygen and glucose. It goes through a bunch of chemical changes and everything, and it's going to spit out H2O, which is water, CO2, carbon dioxide, and cell energy. Okay? It's going to spit out those three things. If you get confused and you need to kind of logic your way through it, you're a person. You need to go run. I need food. I need to breathe. Then I need to breathe out. If you breathe you breathe like water vapor, basically. That's what you're breathing out. That's where you're losing that water. CO2, you're breathing out as you breathe out. That's the acid that you're getting rid of. It's the byproduct. And the cells use the energy to help you continue to run. That is this organelle right here, mitochondria. That's the powerhouse of the cell. That's its whole job. Plants do it a little bit different, but not really, okay? They just have this extra step at the beginning. Plants are still going to do this. Don't get me wrong. Plants are still going to go through this process. However, they can't get the cheeseburger by eating. There is an exception. There's that one plant that smells like rotting corpses. I think it's actually called the corpse flower that eats birds or something. And then Venus flytrap. But for the most part, they don't get it from eating. They get it from this. Photosynthesis. Photosynthesis takes photons from the sun. Here we go. Photons. They're all shooting out at the speed of light towards Earth. Hooray. And it absorbs it. If you have a plant on your window, it gets enough sun. Awesome. If you don't water it, it's dead. So you still need to water it. It still needs H2O. Okay? It's gonna bring in gas from the outside, from the air. If you kept it in, like, let's say a vacuum, you would probably your plant would probably die after a while if it couldn't get a good enough source of CO2. This is why plants are so important, and people freak out when you cut down trees and you're like, oh, you're killing the environment. We breathe out CO2. We produce CO2 from like factories and burning fossil fuels and all kinds of stuff. But plants actually take the CO2 in and remove it from the air. And it creates glucose, it creates the sugar, and it spits out oxygen. Okay? This is why these are important, and people worry that we're messing up the balance, because the plants will actually remove CO2 from the air and give us more clean oxygen. The problem is we're burning more fossil fuels and making more factories and more cars and cutting down trees at the same time. So you're getting this crazy imbalance of going up on one side and down on the other. Messes it up. So that's the chloroplast, little green thing right here. Notice, remember, it also has mitochondria. So once it gets these two things, once it gets the glucose and it gets the oxygen, it can actually take them both into this step. It has the glucose and the oxygen. So what you've done is you basically just added a step that replaces eating for plants. So animals will do this, plants will do that. Chemical formulas can get complicated. I do want you to just be able to, again, if you get confused, you should be able to just stop and think and logic your way through this. You can just sit here and be like, okay, I eat food. I breathe in oxygen. Plants don't. Plants get the sun. You should be able to kind of plug in the little pieces and work step by step. So for photosynthesis, here's how it works. You take in CO2, you take in water. If you don't have either of these, the plant will die. You take in photons from the sun and solar energy. It is going to spit out oxygen, and it's going to retain glucose inside. Remember, glucose is a sugar. So now, think of sap. Like all these things, there's it is an actual sugar in sap. That's why you make like maple syrup, and it's sweet because they've produced the sugar straight from the sun. Notice these two products. Remember, reactants on the left. If something reacts, it's the first things you need. If you produce something, it's on the right. That's the products. Reactants, products. Notice the two products here are the two reactants on here. The animal doesn't have to do the first step. So animal energy, cellular respiration, it needs the glucose from the cheeseburger, or the plant already has it from the sun, and it needs oxygen. If you have the oxygen already, then you're good to go. So if you need more energy and you're trying to break down more glucose, that's why your breathing increases when you run. You're trying to actually get more oxygen in your system. Like elite runners and Olympians, they can actually absorb more oxygen per breath than a normal person. That basically means that they can, that's why it seems like a guy who runs like constantly, they'll exercise and they're not even breathing that hard. Meanwhile, you're like puking over in the corner. They have actually adapted to absorb more oxygen per breath, so it's way easier for them. So they can actually train their bodies to become more efficient at absorbing oxygen. So you get the glucose and oxygen, you breathe out CO2 from your breath, water comes out, and you keep the cell energy in you. The cell energy is going to go into your cells to do any kind of function. This can be anything. This can be a contraction, like in a muscle cell, basically like the squeezing of the muscle. This can be moving stuff around. This can be creating stuff. You cannot use anything except for this. This specific cell energy, I won't even tell you what this cell energy is. You may know it. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to tell you what this is yet, okay? It's got a name. But just know that a very, very specific cell energy has to be there. Cannot use glucose, can't use sucrose, can't use gasoline. There's only one thing the cells can use, and it is this specific cell energy. Animals are going to get their energy from food. Here we go. Sun. There you go. Little side note. I'm drawing the sun as yellow. If you're a science nerd, you know the sun's not actually yellow. Sorry, I can't draw it in white. That's stupid. Plants. Here's my terrible attempt at a cheeseburger. Look at that, mouth-watering. It's delicious. You like lettuce? Cool. There's lettuce. You like tomato? Whatever. All right. This is how you get your energy first. They can skip this step. Animals can skip the solar step. So, after this, you get your glucose from the sun, or you get your glucose from cheeseburger. It doesn't matter. It's still going to our mitochondria, okay? Remember, the mitochondria produces the energy we need for any of the cells to work. Remember, the reason we do this is because this is the only thing that is what? Usable. It's the only usable form of energy for a cell, okay? Can't use sucrose, can't use glucose, can't use a cheeseburger directly. It all has to get processed out. In this case, it gets processed in the mitochondria. Plants will process it initially in our chloroplast over here, and eventually they can use it over here for any type of cell, any type of function, muscle cell, whatever. Look at this. It's a strong muscle doing something. Whatever. Leave me alone. All right. So that'll basically cover energy acquisition. Cells, organelles are little factories, basically like organs in people, all have a specific job. Mitochondria and chloroplast are our energy organelles. They are trying to get energy for our cell. If you don't have energy, you can't do anything. You can't do a function. If you can't perform functions, you can't really be a living thing because you can't reproduce, you can't acquire food, you can't maintain homeostasis. All the little characteristics from our first list, you can't hit them. So that means that you are not living.